All right. So this is the moment you've been waiting for, the final panel of the conference, building on all the other panels. So this is going to be, and I do think it naturally builds on all the other panels because we've heard about AI, we've heard about some of the threat issues, we've heard about some of the new defensive issues. But what this panel is going to do, as the title says, is what new approaches can we bring to this fight, and looking at the threat in that context too. Now, I'm your moderator, Chris Painter. I've been doing cyber stuff for about 32 years now, so a long time. And many of you in the audience have, and on the panel, have been involved in cyberspace issues for a while. And one thing that certainly I've seen is that the threats, of course, have gotten greater, and we've heard about that in this conference. There are responses have gotten somewhat better too, but it's not necessarily we're not necessarily there yet. So first of all, before we begin, I'd just like a show of hands of how many people think we're better off today in cyberspace than we were 10 years ago. I'd say about a third. Okay. Did you say yes, Sami? He's the optimist. He's the optimist on the panel. How many people think that we have this solved, that we're almost there? One person? I can't believe someone thinks we are. We'll talk about that later. Evelyn is not sure. So I mean, but the thing, and this is the frustrating thing, in some part, and this conference has been different, in some part we've been having the same conversations in every summit, every year, and the game really hasn't changed. We talked about these, I mean, the threats have gotten greater, but we haven't seen really a major game changer. And the threats have gotten more severe. And so the question is, how can we really make a difference? We talk about things like deterrence by denial and resilience. We talk about norms in cyberspace, the UN norms, and accountability in cyberspace. But we certainly don't seem to have accountability when you have nation-state actors, when you have criminal groups. We're still running rampant. So what we're going to try to do is frame that and also think about how we might go forward, what some of the new approaches are. So with that, I have a very distinguished panel. Senator Olivier Cadic, who some of you have heard from earlier, who's the Vice President of the Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Armed Services Committee here in France, in the Senate, and Mr. Raimond Kaljulaid, is that right? Close enough.
Whatever you call me is fine by me, thank you.
Who's a member of Parliament and Vice Chair of the NATO Defense and Security Committees and Subcommittees on Future Security and Defense Capabilities in Estonia. And we have Sami Khoury, who is a senior official for cybersecurity for the government of Canada. So let me start with you, Senator. You've been speaking a lot and writing and even working in the Senate about raising the awareness of the threat, particularly from China. That there's a sense that maybe it hasn't achieved that kind of political level, and you've been pushing that. But you've also been more provocative, I think, in saying, okay, well, how do we actually tackle this? How do we go after it? And you've talked about creating a deterrence force, creating more aggressive operations, particularly about China. So why don't you give us your perspectives on this first?
Thank you very much. But first of all, I want to thank Sébastien because this is the third time I have the opportunity to come here, and I'd like to do a junction with what you said. You said every year we have this kind of discussion, and I'd like to start from a year ago, because since last year Paris had the Olympic Games, and we were a world target. When we discussed our 24 budget, end of 23, I said that our cyber team would have to be gold medal or nothing. And I really want to congratulate ANSSI, Viginum, I don't know if Marc-Antoine is still there, and his team, the cybermalveillance.com, and all the people here who helped us to fail all the attacks. The French Cyber Dome has held last year. And we always talk about, negative aspect, but we have also to look at all the people who on a day-to-day basis are working from their desk at home or in the office, and they help us to protect us. And I'm thinking about them. I started my company at 20, and I worked for innovation. And I collaborated on the creation of several weapon systems, and I used to say to those around me, your present is my past. And since I've been in the Senate, I feel like I'm living in someone else's past. We are always reacting. And we are under so many cyber attacks that I feel like we are punching bags. We are overwhelmed. And what have we done since last year? So we passed a NIS2 bill in Senate, so it's in discussion in the National Assembly. And the goal, in fact, we think that people need to be resilient, that they need to learn how to survive attacks. And I think if we can see the difference between 10 years ago and today, I think that we have more and more awareness, and this is part of the approach. I'm going back to what I said last year. The Chinese, the Chinese are doing things on our networks that we observe, but don't understand. They are preparing for war. They are already in our country. When we discussed military program law 2018, I said next conflict would start from cyber and space, and look what happened in Ukraine 22. So comments, I would like to come back to help you to understand where we are at the moment. Comments made in Shangri-La in Singapore 4 days ago. Australian Defense Minister stated that what we have seen from China is the largest increase in military capability and build-up in the conventional sense by any country since the end of World War II. Philippine Minister of Defense 4 days ago called China's action in the South China Sea absolutely irresponsible and reckless. US Defense Secretary said Beijing was credibly preparing to potentially use military force to shift the balance of power in Asia and referred to 2027 deadline President Xi Jinping reportedly gave for the Chinese military to be capable of invading Taiwan. So, winter is coming. So we must prepare for difficult times. And President Macron said, if we consider that Russia can seize part of Ukrainian territory without restriction, without constraint, without a reaction from the world order, what could happen in Taiwan? So everything is connected. Russia has become the proxy of China, as has Iran. Last year I said democratic country must again, and you refer that, the initiative. For too long we have failed to respond to cyber attacks. We are told that this would escalate. Chinese Communist Party, Russia are no longer afraid of us. They see democracies as weak and predictable systems. We must surprise them. That's what I said last year. And I've always said that the best defense is surprise. And what did we see last year? The Israeli beepers that caused terrible damage to the Hezbollah. The lightning rebel offensive that brought down Assad in Syria. And this week, the Ukrainian drone attack on Russian air bases that damages 40 aircraft. In 24, what if we had awarded medals to the countries that cyber attacked us? Gold medal was for China, silver for Russia, bronze for Iran. What new approach have we experimented with? Info sharing, and I want again talk about Viginium, because they, since 21, we launched in France to detect information attack, and I will not come back, but Viginium has uncovered several influence operations. I have a long list, I will not come back on it, but Portal Combat, Red Hands, manipulation on TikTok in Romanian presidential election, Storm 1516 2 weeks ago, a sophisticated Russian influence operation. So all this is now documented, and you can see can see this and learn from this. Just the night following Paris opening ceremony, 3 parts of Paris experimented a 10 minutes power outage. I was in Taiwan 2 days later. The information was picked up by a Chinese media outlet. More than 4 million TikTok accounts relayed the information, some announcing that only the Sacré-Cœur retain eliminated. Another approach to improve our resilience is anticipation. We are seeking to better prepare individuals and companies. We talked about NIS2, but as an example, Viginium, he didn't talk about it, but they prepared a guide for businesses for the Olympic Games. Regarding information threats, businesses and economic actions can be targeted by the following main method of operations. Digital raids that create negative buzz about a company around a controversial issue. Incitement to take physical actions, such as damaging the premises of a targeted business. Impersonation of executives to spread false information that could harm them. Vision has warned of the information threat to targeted economic actors and the economic risk aimed at as affecting the economic interest of the targeted company, leading to a drop in its stock market shares. The information manipulation surrounding DeepSeek arrival is a remarkable example of what has been anticipated. The false information stated that major US tech companies has said that DeepSeek was revolutionizing AI. On January 25, 25th, the release of the DeepSeek R1 model sent shockwaves through the financial markets. NVIDIA lost approximately 17% of its value in one day, representing a market capitalization of nearly $593 billion. 2 months later, DeepSeek has lost more than 20 million users, more than a third compared to the launch, and developing international, so NVIDIA recovered since that time. Another approach is to develop international cyber solidarity, and we must build up public-private international cyber alliance to support and sustain a cyber solidarity policy. General Bonnemaison emphasized this approach in his speech earlier. I believe the example of what the Taiwanese company Infodemic.cc is doing should be shared using AI to identify like the 5 cents accounts. Ethan Tu, founder of the Taiwan AI Labs and Foundation, launched a call for international collaboration on securing digital human rights and evaluating AI bias and danger. Ambassador Massimo Marotti is here, said something very important, I think, yesterday. It is not possible to have together economic interdependence, global competition, economic security. I'm sorry, but we have to disconnect us from China, and it is urgent. If China attacks Taiwan in 27, as it was mentioned, we just have to be ready to not make any business there by 27. It's just in 18 months. And when we were beginning of 23, I had a conference in Israel and said to all our businesses, who did a plan in 22 that they had to leave by the end of 22 from Russia? And at that time I said, who has a plan to leave China by the end of the year? So we know, now have some dates and we have the experience of China. So we have to disconnect us from China very urgently. So last but not least, and it's true, an international cyber deterrent force must be created to defend democracies and directly hinder the Chinese Communist Party. We need to show now official support to Taiwan to discourage escalation to discourage Chinese Communist Party to attack Taiwan. The last time a country declared a war to another was in 1982. China and Russia declared cyber war against us a long time ago. So to summarize, if Russia is a storm, China is a climate change. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and that's actually paraphrasing one of my favorite statements, that if Russia is as you say, if Russia is a hurricane, China's climate change. Yeah, so it's a very good. I think Rob Joyce said that first. Many people said that, but you know, so two quick follow-ups. One is, do you feel like in the French Senate and the French government, and really in the European context, are you a voice in the wilderness, or are you getting that kind of political support now? The problem has often been that we all care about cyber, but if you go to the political level, it's one of like 1,000 priorities, and it hasn't gotten the priority. Do you think you're breaking through to get that level of attention?
Yeah, now it's really considered as a top priority in Senate. So we have maybe disagreement on China, but it's everywhere. You have a different approach. The issue, we saw it with Russia. Until maybe 2 weeks before Russia entered into Ukraine, people were saying they will never do this. And they did not really prepare themselves. They prefer ignore. In a democracy, people don't like this kind of news, so they prefer ignore it until they have to face it. So, but as a politician, I need to share what I see. It's really important to prepare everyone. And I know nobody likes bad news. I don't like bad news, but it's better to prepare ourselves to bad news in order to avoid it, rather than to say it will never happen and to face it when it's too late. And that's, I think, today, what they are doing in Taiwan, to be honest, they are advanced, very advanced. When I compare what happened to Romania, in fact, they did exactly the same thing 4 months before in Taiwan, but it failed in Taiwan because they were prepared, better prepared. So we have to work in a really public way with them, because we'll be better, and some are already working with them, but we have to show that we are in the same field. We are all democracies, and we have to show support and work with them, because they can help us to do to stop this kind of cyber war.
So shifting to our colleague from Estonia, you've been literally almost on the front lines of another threat actor, Russia, which we've talked about a lot during this. What have you observed in terms of what they've been doing and how we can effectively push back against that? And, it's interesting, and I'll ask all the panelists this, the U.S. has become, or at least stated they could become more offensive. I mean, more offensive in cyberspace, more offensive generally, that's a whole other issue, but more offensive in cyberspace, where they said that one of the things they would do is use offensive operations more, and it's not clear if this is going to be done with allies or being done individually, and that I think Waltz, when he was the National Security Advisor, talked about planting cyber time bombs in the Chinese infrastructure or even potentially Russian infrastructure. So what are you seeing? Do you see those kind of approaches, what you've heard about the cyber deterrence force, what a lot of countries are looking at? How do you see that playing in this, and do you think that's going to work?
Well, the first observation is, of course, how open we are as societies. So I haven't heard the Russians or the Chinese declare openly that our intent is to mess with your systems and take them down and spy on you. Instead, they talk about being, a force of good in the world, and all they want is peace. But of course, and then we openly declare that we're going to put stuff in their systems and then dare them to find it. So. But kind of coming back to your question, I mainly do security policy, so I'm not a cyber expert as that. And I was kind of hoping when I was coming here, when Sebastian asked me, that you guys would be like, oh, everything's great, we just need to improve what we've got. But what I hear here is basically the same that I heard a few weeks ago when I was in the United States at an Atlantic Council panel talking about hard military security. It's that same thing, that we're not really doing enough. And just to kind of put, the question was also like, why? Or what is the reason that year after year you come to that conclusion? Well, I'll give you this example. So in a few weeks, NATO will meet in The Hague. There's going to be a NATO summit. And of course, the main thing everybody is expecting and looking at is what will the US president say or do when he arrives in Hague? What will his messages be? Will he, reaffirm America's commitment to the alliance? But in terms of substance, the main question, of course, is military spending. So will NATO in The Hague agree to new spending targets? So we had a spending target of 2%, as you're aware of. The year before the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, the full-scale invasion started in February 22. So in 2021, it was about 6 or 7 countries that were meeting the goal of 2%. The rest of the alliance was not. It's gone up a little bit, but we're still not at the point where all allies are spending at least 2%. So we had Mark Rutte with us recently in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and he indicated that probably, what's been reported in the press, that he's going to try to get a deal where NATO countries agree to 3.5 plus 1.5 on civil resilience, military mobility. Probably it's been discussed what goes under that additional 1.5. Could be that maybe some elements of cyber could be considered. I'm not so sure, but we will see. But the problem is with these targets, and then come the politicians. And the politicians are the ones that actually have to do the state budgets, and they have to find the real money and actually spend the real money. And the problem is that going to that level of defense spending, for instance, Estonia is now next year going to have about 5.4 of our GDP on hard military spending. Many countries in the Eastern Europe are doing the same. This means, really difficult trade-offs of raising taxes, accepting even higher levels of debt. The Estonian opposition right now is having a little bit of a cyber operation where they're distributing this list of everything that the government is doing in terms of taxes. And there's about 20 points of all kinds of taxes going up and benefits being cancelled. We have done what is basically could be considered a pension cut. We have cut support that we provide to families with children. Any tax we have has gone up, some of them quite significantly. We've instituted new taxes, so for instance like cars. It's hugely unpopular. At the moment, the Estonian government is polling at about 20%, while the opposition is polling at about 80%. But it's an existential question and it has to be done. So the problem is, and I think Jens Stoltenberg has used this very much, he said, we all know what we have to do. The problem is, how do you get re-elected after you do it? And that's the issue. And I'm, I don't know if it's the same in cyber, but I'm sure there are similarities. The people that actually allocate the resources, especially when we talk about state security and cybersecurity, they know what the problems are. We don't really, I think, need to convince them. They've experienced them maybe, personally. They've seen misinformation directed at them. They've been maybe targets of these things. But the problem is that, and I understand this completely, that if I was a politician not in one of the Eastern European countries, but somewhere in Western Europe, it's a really tough sell. Because, if I'm a UK politician, people in the United Kingdom are not worried that Russian tanks will soon be approaching Manchester. So it's a really tough sell. But at the same time, and I'm going to finish with this, is what I want to kind of push back on, and we had Mark Rutte also pushing back on that. Don't divide Europe into frontline countries and non-frontline countries. Europe is, if you just open any map and you look at the size of Russia and the size of Europe, we are all frontline countries. France is a frontline country. If you look at what the Russians have in their arsenal of missile technology, it is absolutely, they can hit this building very exactly and collapse it over our heads. And they are prepared to do it if necessary. So you have to understand that there is no such thing as a safe space in Europe if we go to war with, between NATO and Russia. So there is no safe haven. You're not going to be safe in southern Portugal. You're not going to be okay in Scotland. It will be you know, a huge conflict demanding tens of millions of lives. So I think if somehow we need to get across to the people that this is the case, and then we will have, I think, the political support for spending, and also spending on cyber and protection in cyber and cyber resilience. And with that, I hand over.
I mean, it's interesting because we've talked about this for a long time, getting really public support, and that translates into political support. And the only thing I saw, the war in Ukraine was a little bit of it, and cyber there, but even more so ransomware, because that made it a pocketbook issue, as we say in the US. When people had to line up to get gas because of the Colonial Pipelines attack, then it became a political issue. Then you had Biden going and meeting with Putin and raising it as one of the top issues, which had never happened before. But then that kind of, you know, you see this go up and then go down again. And so that's kind of the challenge. And Sami, you've seen that many times, I think. And you've also, I think, you know, you're the more positive person on this panel, I think, in terms of saying, you know, maybe resilience works. Maybe there's some of the things that you've been doing and some of the things around ransomware, which are criminal groups, but often with the cover of nation states like Russia, but also the nation state threats. So from your perspective, particularly in helping trying to secure systems for Canada, not necessarily doing the offensive stuff, but there is some stuff to talk about there. What have you seen?
Thanks, Chris, and happy to contribute to this conversation. So I like the name of the panel, New Approaches to Cyber Defense and the New International Order, although I might disagree with the word order. It's maybe New World Disorder and what's out there. But having said that, I'll focus on the first part, which is the new approaches to cyber defense, because my colleagues did describe what is out there, and what is out there, you know, Canada is not immune to it. So we see the same threats, the same 4 countries, although last year we added India to the list. So the list is a bit dynamic, and maybe we'll add other countries at some point. But essentially, the basic 4 are there, and we are facing them like everybody else. So allow me to spend a few minutes talking about new approaches on a range of, I would say from one end, simple things that we are doing to all the other end, the more active operation. We call them active cyber as opposed to offensive cyber. But essentially, I'll spend a few minutes covering that. So at one end of the spectrum, information sharing, whether it's the advice and guidance, the public-private partnerships that we keep improving. So I wouldn't argue that we've nailed how to do private-public partnership, but we keep learning from things that mistakes that we've made to make them better, create circles of trust, and things like pre-ransomware notification, where we issue notification to company saying like we have information that would point to the fact that you might be a victim to a ransomware, go check on that system. These are things that we're doing to push things out there in terms of information. In terms of capabilities, we also are sharing our capabilities. Maybe I'll pause for a second. I'm an optimist because when the Cyber Center was created in 2018, we barely had nothing. We knew how to secure government, but when we look at Canada as a nation, we basically weren't talking to anybody. So since 2018 to 2025, it's been 7 years now. I say we've improved a lot. Have we completely, say mission accomplished? Absolutely not. But I'm an optimist that if we're on the same trajectory, and we keep getting the funding, the support from our political leaders, that we will continue to make a difference. So capabilities that we've shared, like a threat feed, we've open sourced a lot of our tools on GitHub. So if you look for the Cyber Center on GitHub, you'll find a lot of our tools are posted there. We don't have a monopoly on innovation. So this week, actually wrapping up on Friday, we have an event called Geek Week, where about 300 people are coming together to see what new approaches to cyber defense can we roll out. It's private sector, public sector, students, 300 people crammed in a conference facility, working almost 24 hours a day on coming up with these new ideas. We've worked with the telcos to standardize spam reporting. So one number for all of Canada, anybody can forward their spam SMSs to 4227, and then all the telcos would sort of detonate the links that are in these SMS and take them down. We've worked with partners in the private sector to take down websites that impersonate the government. That's also speaking to the partnership that we have with the private sector. On the international front, Joint Cybersecurity Advisory, it started very small circle, maybe within the Five Eyes, but now we're doing joint cybersecurity advisories beyond the Five Eyes with many countries in that room and looking always for an opportunity to do more, do capacity building. So engagement on the international scene is also growing. When there is an incident, so we have incidents like everybody else. So I'm not gonna. And these incidents, sometimes cross those lines of responsible or cyber behavior. And that's when sort of we decide, okay, so what are we going to do about it? They tend to be about nation state. So there's big conversations across government. Sometimes there's a private démarche. We'll let the diplomats sort that out. Sometimes it's a public calling them out and saying, China is behind this attack. Sometimes it's joint with other international partners because we've seen the same thing in a number of countries. So we compared notes and say, Russia went after vaccine research in the early days of the pandemic. Is it a deterrence? I don't think so. But it's a way of saying we know you've done that and we don't accept it as crossing a line. Lastly, in 2019, we received the authority to conduct active cyber operations. And that's something new for Canada, but since 2019, the number of operations that we've conducted has grown exponentially. And while we don't talk specifically about which operation we've carried out, we acknowledge in our annual report last year, this is a public document, that we've degraded a ransomware group, and that we've also completely disrupted DDoS, somebody who's doing DDoS against Canada. So these are two examples. Again, we don't name who behind them, but these are activities that we've carried out. We've done many more than those two, but we're keeping our stories a little bit, for the time being, a little bit under wrap. But these are all capabilities that we have that we, depending on the severity of the cyber incident, depending on the appetite, the political appetite to do something, we will pursue one of those things to try to make a difference, at least on the Canadian side, but also with our international partner where we can do things together. We want to partner with them.
I mean, it is interesting that there's a lot more transparency about these active or offensive operations than there used to be. It used to be, the U.S. would never talk about them, other people never talk about them. But we still haven't gotten to the point, if you're going to have any kind of deterrent effect, I think you would say, you don't want to reveal tactics and procedures, certainly. But if you use an offensive operation or a cyber operation or active defense or whatever you call it, and you can spend hours just in the lexicon, wouldn't you want to say, let's say to Russia, that was us, and we're going to do it again to you unless we start seeing some changes. And if you're really going to have a deterrent effect, you don't want to hide behind it and say, is that a mistake? You want them to know you're doing it, right? So I haven't really seen that level of transparency yet. Do you expect that will happen, or is that just a pipe dream?
Well, actually, I would argue with you that we have seen it, but perhaps we haven't realized that we've seen it. So I really agree with what the senator said, and it's great to have people like you in French politics who say it so directly. Russia, when our intelligence agencies look at what Russia is doing, it is clear that they are preparing for a large-scale military conflict with NATO. So they are building an army of about 1.5 million people facing us. And just to give you perspective, the Russians right now for the Ukrainian campaign are recruiting about 40,000 fighters a month. Most of them not coercing them, but paying them so that they basically come voluntarily. The whole United Kingdom has a recruitment goal of 7,000 for a year and have great difficulties meeting that goal. So this is the disparity, but I definitely don't want to sound only negative. So if you think about, in a situation like that, what are the Russians doing? One of the I think priorities for them is not so much sabotage, but it's espionage. It's stealing of secrets. So it's classical. If you're preparing for war, what you want to know is what are the adversaries, so that means NATO, their existing military capabilities, what is their production capacity, and how fast they can regenerate those military capabilities. So how many tanks they have, you count the tanks, you count the cannons, and what are the production lines, and how many tanks do they churn out in a month and can replace the stocks that they've got. And then the third category is political and military intent. Now, what happened in 2021 and leading up to the full-scale invasion? It was an unprecedented step taken by the Biden administration to publish a lot of the intel that they had regarding Russian war plans in Ukraine. And it was quite interesting. We recently had a conference in Tallinn, the Lennart Meri conference, where the journalist from The Atlantic that was invited into the Biden White House, the first journalist that was given this information, that Russia is planning a full-scale invasion. And of course, the US journalists were a little bit skeptical because...
This was the journalist that was deliberately added, not like what's happened recently.
Yeah. So deliberately, they invited him in, not into a signal chat, but to the real physical White House. And so the journalist went, well, you know, you're saying this to us, but you also said that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. So prove it. And the Biden administration took the unprecedented step of actually showing the journalists some of that intel, which they can then verify through, for instance, satellite images, which you can procure commercially. So, in essence, what you're saying is, well, why haven't we told the Russians that, you know what, we can actually see under your blankets, and we know what color underwear you're wearing under those expensive Brioni suits that you're wearing? Well, we have. And the second case, I would say, you know, we have this new term in espionage now, is open source intelligence. So open source intelligence, of course, is done by all the intelligence agencies, but also if you look at organizations such as the Navalny Fund, which is published on YouTube, if you haven't seen it, I recommend it highly. You know, massive investigations into the private lives and the spending habits of the Russian military and political elites. And if you think back to the Cold War times, and you think, well, the effort that, for instance, the CIA had to make if they wanted to recruit somebody, to find out, you know, what they were doing. Did they have gambling debts? Did they do cocaine? Did they have a lover somewhere? What could be how can we compromise this person? How can we get a handle on them? Now, the Navalny organization is doing all this online while they're dispersed in Lithuania and wherever. And I promise you that the Russians feel that we are effing with them pretty hard. It's just that perhaps, you know, this is where I come back to the positive side, is perhaps we don't realize it maybe that way, but I'm sure that the day that the Kremlin saw the press reports about the invasion plans, I'm sure it was a pretty bad day for some people in the Kremlin.
So what we're hearing is it's a mix of cyber tools, but traditional tools too. I want to give, I have many other questions, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask a couple questions. So are there any hands?
I do. Raise my hand.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. What I like with this panel, it was very important, is that in every conferences you hear about democracy, but you are not seeing that much member of parliament. So thank you for being there, because the question of the people is key. How they stick to the vision. And I think that executive, at least in my country, are not enough aware themselves, so they cannot promote it correctly in a good way. And the good news for them is that when you're a minister in France, you are not elected, you are nominated. So you have no fear to make things done. The problem is, are you interested in it? And I think there is a lot of lack of interest, at least in my country. And I'm not talking about the Minister of the Armed Forces, because they are doing a great job, but maybe others. When it comes to all we said, the NATO, level of spending. And, you know, in this time, we're spending a lot, the money we don't have. We give lots of money for Ukraine, of course, but now for NATO, right? But also for cybersecurity EU legislations, and we have no money. So where can we find all this money? That's my first statement. But then it brings me to the question. If the money we put in NATO or in the European Cyber Fund is done to buy US weapons, is it a good thing? How can we do that? Because that's a debate in my country, first side of the question. And then, according to your answer, what would be, can we imagine that the US money will buy European weapons? What do you think about that? This is a tricky one, right? I keep
Who
it
would like to
together.
take this? Senator, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that yesterday Chancellor Scholz and German Chancellor and President Macron said that we had to create a European cloud and something independent of China and US. I think if we start to develop this kind of approach, we are doing exactly what Chinese want. That's my position. I understand that for politicians, sometimes they say, "Okay, we first." But but the problem, do you want to stay alone? And what we promoted last year when we came to DC, and it was promoted by White House and Department of State, was cyber solidarity. So it means we have to think together, we have to work together, and it has to make sense for everyone. And it comes back to what Massimo said. So it's global competition, but security and economic interdependence. We can have these two: global competition, economic security, economic interdependence, if someone provide also economic security. So we have to work together, think together, act together, and that's what was said, I think, here. So now, if for some internal political reason, people start to claim, okay, we want to do it alone, I think we have not the critical size, Europe or US, to face China today. So that's my point of view, and this is what I will defend, because the problem for us is to define in what world we want to live in. Is it a world with someone who decides for everyone, and you forget freedom of expression, you forget freedom of enterprise, you forget freedom? Is it the world we want to live in? So we have to work together. That's my feeling.
I don't know if you guys have very quick reflections, because I want to get one other question from the audience. We're running out of time, but Sami?
Just to the second part of Sebastian's question so Canada, the Prime Minister did announce that he wants to join the EU Defence Initiative. So we'll see what that means, but he did announce that. And in our sort of 2% goal, there is a number of cyber initiatives that we have proposed. So again, waiting for budget to come down, but there is appetite to do a lot more into that envelope.
Raimond?
Yeah, so our policy, looking from Estonia, is we do not want to see walls between allies. And it also, when it comes to cooperation in defense or defense industry or digital industries, we want to see as much cooperation as possible, not only within NATO, that is a priority, but also we've recently opened up, for instance, our defense industry to investments from like-minded countries in Asia and other regions. Just to give it context, I mean, usually when I'm in America, everybody gets this, but how many of you have seen the Godfather movie, right? It begins with, well, the Undertaker comes to Don Corleone complaining about his daughter being mistreated. And then Don Corleone tells the Undertaker that, look, if you are my friend, and if an honest man like you is to make enemies, they will become my enemies, and then they will fear you. So actually, we should perhaps look at this current situation that we are in also as an opportunity. That if Trump succeeds in making America great again, which is an American matter I'm not going to comment on, but if they also encourage Europe to become, as the French have wanted, truly sovereign, truly able to and capable of defending itself. We are a continent of over 500 million people. If we work with the UK and we work with Asia, and if then one of us were to make any enemies, they will be enemies for all of us, and then they will fear us. So we should actually see this in a way also as an opportunity.
Well, and during the first Trump administration, the phrase was America first, but not America alone. And I think getting back to that would be helpful. And certainly, I remember even 10 years ago, people talking about a Schengen cloud, to your point. And the company said it doesn't work for us. We're global companies. It doesn't. So you have to have this hanging together. Is there any one last question from the audience? Because I want to be respectful. Yes. Wait, get a microphone. Yeah. Unless you want to yell, which is
multitask.
Project. Get two microphones. we need better coordination in the.
Between the left and the right.
That's all right. Always a problem.
Let me start with this. I was born in '62, right? So I'm a bit older, although still active military. So my question and my statement is partly as a military, but also as a civilian of the free western part of Europe. By the way, Dutch, so he's called Mark Rutte, our SecGen. So first thing first, new approaches. We all know that. The NIS2, strengthening your cyber defense. We all know the steps, especially the companies know how to do it. So that's step number one. Have great defense in order. Second step is always what we say as a military: if you want peace, prepare for war. Defending forward cyber operations. Some countries do that already. Great. NATO is only allowed in an Article 5 situation, but some people say in the audience we are working on a framework that we can do already some stuff already. Let them know, technical and political attribution, good. But is that all? And I'll talk as a father of 3 boys. We always took our kids to the beach of Normandy because that started the end of the war. But and by the way, it's a war now. I'm a cyber guy, so every morning in the morning brief, I see what happens right now. For decades, it's a war already in the cyber domain. But how do you end a war? That's by a signature by politicians. We all know that. So I try to think about this 3-step tango. Make sure that your defense is good, is great. B, take care of an offense. But C, get that signature. And talk about China. I mean, I lived in the States. When you go to Walmart, almost everything is out of China. I know how much China owes in US debt. I know how much assets they have. So if you don't like China, don't buy it. Get them out of your financial system. Be on your own. Buy European. But that's on the side, that's financially. But I'd like to end the statement as a father to you, Senator, and to all the politicians. Step forward. Be strong. Negotiate, but get the signature for a peace, because I prepare for war all my life, but in the end, I want peace for my kids and for our society as well. That's all. Thank you.
So less a question than a comment, and I think I have Sebastian doing the time symbol over there. So, look, I just say that it's been a really good panel. I think a good discussion. Obviously, we could talk about these issues for hours. We won't do that today. But even as I tried to begin the panel on kind of a pessimistic note, but even as a former prosecutor, I'm a glass half full kind of person, and I do think we've seen progress. We've seen more political awareness. We've seen joint attribution really rise a lot, and France didn't used to join those, but they started joining those joint attributions. Now, joint attribution, as you said, doesn't solve it, doesn't really name and shame Russia, but it does, I think, have some effect for further action. but I still think there's a lot to do. So, you know, I think this is going to be a ripe conversation for next year as well, and probably the year after that. And I want all of us, all of you, if you could thank our wonderful panelists here, and make sure you follow up with them. So let's all give a round of applause to our panelists. And I would, you know, the senator reminded me that I'm not always the most grateful person. I should have said in the beginning how grateful we all are to Sebastian for holding this conference. It has been a lovely, really, I think, insightful couple of days, so thank you for that.